where is the economy heading? It's pretty clear now that an extension of the lockdown seems most likely. If it lifts, it will lift perhaps partially and in phases. While that may be what is necessary at this point as far as containing COVID-19 goes, what is the kind of impact it will have on various businesses and, of course, on people's livelihoods and jobs? We keep speaking consistently with different stakeholders on this show. Today, I have a very special guest with me. I want to welcome Mr. Vivek Gambhir, CEO and MD of Godrej Consumer Products Limited. Mr. Gambhir, it's a pleasure to be speaking with you.
Pleasure. Happy to.
Okay, let me begin by, getting your take on the extension of the lockdown. Now, while we're waiting, of course, for official word to come in and which state will react in which way, it seems likely that there will be some sort of an extension. It's unlikely we'll go back to business as usual from the 15th of April. Does that impact your revival plan in any way? How do you look at this extension, possible extension?
As we know, this lockdown was unprecedented and came all of a sudden. And it has led to major supply chain disruptions. The government has been very aware of the challenges and has been working with the industry to help resume supply chain operations. Initially, the big challenges were in terms of getting approvals to open up the supply chain and to also ensure that the union government guidelines were being uniformly implemented on the ground. The government has been issuing a series of guidelines. We have seen significant improvement in terms of getting permissions on the ground. The biggest challenge that remains is availability of labor. Labor to run the factories, truckers, loaders and unloaders for warehouses. And so that continues to be a big challenge. That challenge is driven by two things. One is certainly there are apprehensions of, security and health on the part of some workers. And the second is that there are a number of workers who have gone back to their towns and villages. And so how we try and work with the government, and the government will need to support us on trying to get the labor back to be able to resume supply chain operations. That clearly is the biggest challenge right now.
So let me come back again to the specific question about the extension of the lockdown. And now we don't know how far this will go. What is the kind of contingency plans you are working on right now? We really don't know when your public transport will restart or when this labor can come back or supply chains will really come back into shape.
For our office-based employees, we don't see too many issues because they're all used to working from home now. The technology is working, and I think they are all getting used to a new way of working. For our employees who are working in the sales side, they are learning how to do more work on the phone. So telesales and tele-ordering has actually become quite an important way to communicate with the stores. The challenge again remains in terms of distribution, which is largely around transportation and logistics and factory production. Currently, we are at about 25% of production levels for essential items. I think if we can try and get some of our labor back, it would be good for us to try and get to about 50% production levels in about 4 weeks or so. Now, assuming that the pandemic doesn't spread too much after that, we could potentially look at getting to about 100% production levels for essential items in about 8 to 12 weeks. For non-essential items, it could take almost 12 to 16 weeks. So we certainly are looking at about 8 to 12 weeks, assuming that the pandemic can be contained to be able to get the supply chain fully normalized.
So there are many who are proposing that there is a sort of a phased lift on the lockdown, or maybe I'll put it another way, a partial resumption of economic activity. Now, this could even be broadening your list of essential items, increasing supply of more kinds of goods and services. Do you think that that is the need of the hour right now?
Absolutely. The first priority has to be containing the pandemic. At the same time, while we're containing the pandemic, it is important to ensure the health and safety for every single node of the supply chain. But we also have to ensure availability of essential items. That is something the government is also committed to. And we have to try and also see if we can revive economic activity. I think it'll have to be done in a phased manner to be able to identify risk spots and categorize areas such as red, yellows, and greens. And for those areas that are yellow and green, at least start reviving some economic activity. But it has to be done in a phased manner because, again, we are all learning as we go along. And the last thing what we want is to prematurely open up the country and then go back to what Singapore and Japan had to do. Because again, after 4 weeks, a lockdown. For a country of our size, doing a lockdown in the first place was a huge achievement in some ways. And I think we need to ensure that the curve can be flattened and do it in a more staggered and phased manner.
I agree with you 100%. The focus needs to be on containing the pandemic. But I do also want to talk about the economic side of it. What is the kind of impact you see, the kind of hit you see? And do you see this lasting over the next couple of quarters? What is the kind of scenario you see in the next 6 to 8 months?
The economic impact has been very significant. And, FMCG sales are very closely tied to economic growth. So consumer income and sentiment are a big driver of our sales. And typically, FMCG growth, if you go back to the last few years, has always been around 1 to 1.5 times nominal GDP growth. Last year, the number was about 1.2 times. So if economic growth suffers, the FMCG sector will definitely be adversely impacted. But this is a very resilient sector. And so I do expect the sector to also bounce back very quickly. There can be all kinds of debates, whether it will be a U-shaped or a V-shaped recovery. But I do expect the FMCG sector to bounce back once growth returns. And within the sector, I think staples will do much better than discretionaries in the near term. The only data that we have in terms of economic impact is from China, where the lockdown lasted for about a couple of months. So during January and February, we saw retail sales decline by almost 20%. But we also saw a decent recovery in the March period. So again, India will have its own course. A lot depends again on the pace of recovery, how long it takes for the lockdown and things to normalize. But the impact will definitely be significant. But I do expect a recovery quite soon after things normalize. Impact will definitely be there in quarter one. Quarter two remains to be seen. I do expect this to be a story of two halves. So if we can get the pandemic under control, while the first half could be challenging for the sector, I do believe that the second half could be quite positive for the sector.
Overall, if I can just speak a bit about GCPL, what has been the overall picture, including international businesses?
So for us, India is a little bit more than half of our business. So the biggest impact has been in our India business. Indonesia has done relatively better because the country has so far had extreme social distancing guidelines, but factories are partially open and retail stores have also been partially open for some time. So in that sense, the effect in Indonesia has been less. Across Africa, I think South Africa and Nigeria and Kenya have all been implementing lockdown measures. So the impact has been fairly similar to India. But in India, I think the impact has been more simply because of the nature of the lockdown.
You mentioned a little while ago about how the whole space, FMCG, is closely linked with consumer sentiment. And now we're already beginning to see some of the ripple effect of the lockdown on people's incomes, on individual incomes, whether they're deferment of pay or pay cuts or general uncertainty. Do you look at that having a longer term impact, and how would you prepare for something like that?
See, overall, the FMCG sector has tremendous headroom for growth. If you look at penetration rates across most categories, the penetration rates are quite low. Firms will have to adapt to ensure that they have affordable, accessible price points. So sachets could actually become more important, particularly for convenience products. At the same time, you might even see large packs getting more popular for people who want to, keep things in reserve or reduce the amount of trips that they take outside. So I do expect to see greater polarization in the market. You will start seeing new categories emerge in health, hygiene, and protection. So clearly, while there will be new opportunities, if income growth is a challenge, the industry has seen this in the past, we'll have to adapt our model to create much more value for money and affordable offerings.
Just a broad perspective from you now. Let me move to the larger economy and your sector and others. In fact, there are all kinds of frightening GDP forecasts coming out for FY21 for India, ranging from 2.1 to 1.8. Frankly, I don't know if anyone has a clear picture right now. But what is your sense? What is your sense of how the next year is going to look?
One thing that we're all learning is that all of us who are quite used to having all the answers are now trying to operate in a world where we can all ask questions, but it's very difficult to actually have even a single precise estimate. Things are changing by the day. I think as a country, we are resilient. We adapt quite well. And over time, there will be global opportunities, I think, both to really drive Make in India. There'll be export opportunities as well. We have 1.3 billion Indians who are, in the consuming class. And so I do see that once we can figure out how to deal with this pandemic, it will lead to a much stronger and a better India. Even in our industry, we are seeing a lot of cooperation happening between the players. We are all trying to work together to figure out the role that we can play to ensure the collective well-being of the nation. So I feel optimistic that we will learn our lessons from this and come out stronger. The economic pain will be felt in the near term. And so, for example, I think we look to the government to have a very aggressive stimulus package, particularly for the small and medium enterprises. I think companies of our size, we do have the balance sheets, we have the wherewithal to weather the storm. But we do look to the government to provide more support for MSMEs, particularly in our industry. There are lakhs of distributors and wholesalers who will need some help. We are trying our best to give them some short-term credit to help them. But we do look for support from the government, whether it is easing or increasing working capital credit, or even perhaps providing wage support. I think at this stage, the government needs to be generous enough to be able to open its purse strings and do all it can, recognizing some of the limitations of that exist, to be able to try and get the economy back on track.
What do you think the role of corporate India should be? I mean, we're seeing some interesting innovations coming through. Entire businesses changing their production strategy to meet new needs created because of COVID-19, whether it's getting into manufacturing sanitizers or ventilators or face masks or PPEs. Do you think there is scope for more innovation, and can corporate India play a larger role?
Absolutely. I think this is a defining moment for corporate India in terms of the role that each company individually plays and the industry collectively plays to ensure the collective well-being of the nation. And I'm also seeing, along with various companies, industry associations like the CII are really stepping up not just to try and work in the communities around us, but also try and find solutions to some of the biggest problems that are being faced. This is a humanitarian challenge, a public health crisis, and could even be a huge economic challenge. And so I do expect all companies to have a much deeper sense of purpose and do all they can to be able to get the country out of this crisis and put the country on a much stronger foundation in the future.
How do you see life changing after COVID-19? Just before this interview began, you and I were speaking about how every business has seen, and every individual has seen a seismic shift in the way they work. Do you think there are certain things which will change permanently, perhaps?
Clearly, we will see the emergence of a new normal. The new normal will be about how people treat work and ways of working. We've all gotten used to working very efficiently, as we were discussing, using technology. And so how people work, how they think about commute times will go significant alteration. We will see huge amounts of collaboration. I think we are seeing a huge amount of collaboration in the supply chain between players. We're seeing much higher levels of cooperation between the government and industry than we've ever seen before. I'm also seeing, at least for the FMCG industry, you will see new consumer behaviors, new consumer habits, whether it's more sales online, whether it is new categories emerge in health and sanitizers. For example, sanitizers were a very small segment till about a month ago. And now sanitizers have actually become a very large opportunity. So across the board, I think we will see new consumer habits, new consumer behaviors. As consumers learn to deal with the crisis, we will see an emergence of a new normal. It might shape existing categories, but will also provide new opportunities for various players.
I want to round off this interview, Mr. Gambhir, by asking about how you are coping with this situation right now. You're running a massive company from home. What are you doing to ensure productivity, manage your stress?
It is definitely a time of anxiety for anybody who is working from home, or I worry far more about our factory employees and our sales teams, who are our actual true heroes, who are taking huge risks to be able to provide essential products for our consumers. So I'm incredibly proud of them. So compared to the risks they are taking, I think, us sitting at home, it's a cakewalk in some ways, but I'm truly blessed to have a fantastic team. What this means for us is that we have to connect more with our teams, we have to engage them, to try and find a way to allay their anxiety. But I think for a company like Godrej, where we have a very strong sense of purpose and values, this is a defining moment for all leaders. And I do hope that we can look back after 6 months to 12 months and feel proud, both as individuals or as companies, as a country, in terms of how we navigated this crisis and come out stronger.
Are there any new skills that you've picked up in this time which you didn't think you have?
I hadn't spent that much time in digital marketing before. So I've been taking a couple of courses to brush up some of my skills in digital marketing. My daughter, who's studying in college, has been coding quite a bit. So I've been trying to have her teach me a bit of coding. And then I think I've also been trying to be a little bit more responsible at home and contribute as much as I can to some of the household chores.
Excellent to hear that. Thank you so much, Mr. Gambhir, and hope to see you in person on the other side of this.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.